Welcome back to the Chase MedSearch podcast. Excited to do this podcast today with Kathryn Traff, an old friend of mine. She's not old, but we've known each other a long time, and I'm excited to have her here. Before we get started, I want to do a public service announcement and ask you, even if you're listening to this on a podcast in your car, on Apple or Spotify, just go to the YouTube channel and subscribe. You can still continue to consume the content as you normally do, but we'd like to bump our subscribers up on YouTube, and that's very easy to do. I'm on, you can just easily find a Chase MedSearch podcast on YouTube. So PSA out of the way, welcoming Kathryn Traff, who is a brain health mentor, speaker, author, and coach. Kathryn is passionate about helping women get out of the gray zone with respect to drinking habits and into their healthiest and happiest version of themselves. Kathryn has 17 years in her career in neuroscience. She pivoted into entrepreneurship after that to help others walk away from alcohol and not miss it. She uses her Revive methodology that blends neuroscience, mindset work, and a faith practice to completely change her clients' brains, attitudes, and their entire lives. She's got a career trajectory that's as unconventional as it is inspiring. Welcome to the Chase MedSearch podcast, Kathryn.
Hello. Thank you, Jordan. So when you reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to come talk with me on my podcast? I was like, oh my gosh, this is like coming full circle. This is amazing. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on. We've known each other quite some time, since 2005. I look back on LinkedIn when you first got into medical devices from a successful pharmaceutical career. So I know your backstory, but our listeners don't. So walk us through a bit of your career. You worked very high level neuromodulation and neurosurgical cases, some very, very serious cases. But your work in neurology started even prior to Medtronic, isn't that right?
Yeah, it's see, this is one of the reasons why I love having you for my friend, because you always do your homework. That's what makes you so awesome at what you do. Because it's even I forget that, some of the things that I've done in the world that I've came up in. But to answer your question, before I started in the world of medical device and neurosurgery in neuroscience, my first real peak at working with patients, working in neuroscience, came from a couple of physicians that I had developed really close relationships with when I was working. At the time, it was Wyeth Pharmaceuticals. It's now Pfizer. And I was representing a class of drugs, psychotropics, for your audience. And I got the most fascinating education because these physicians were very, very passionate about, we think there's a better way to do things for patients. And they would have me come in and spend time with them. Obviously, in those days, it was very different. You asked the patient's permission if they could come in, but I spent days with them. And that's really where my love and passion for neuroscience and all things brain related was born. I didn't know anything about the brain back in those days. I had to learn all of those things and go through the training. But spending the time with those two physicians really got me fascinated and intrigued with that world. And then you and I met in the middle of interviewing to go in with Medtronic. And at the time, neuromodulation, we weren't really working with the brain at that point, but it was the entire nervous system. And it felt like the next needed step in my career at that time. So I would say that's where my love for all things neuroscience developed. And then the 17 years that I spent working with Medtronic in all kinds of cases. I like to joke about there's only one or two divisions of Medtronic I did not work in. But for the most part, I really stayed focused in that world of neuroscience. And it's been just an absolute gift to me to have that experience behind me, setting the stage and giving me the foundation for what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. What kind of neurosurgical cases were you doing? Because I know we're going to get into talking about the brain and things like that, but just give us a little behind the curtain kind of view of the types of cases you were doing, because I know you're heavily involved in neurosurgical, because you spent a brief minute in neuromod, did a great job, and then transitioned obviously over to some really intense surgical procedures.
Yeah, so these were the days of Medtronic where the neuroscience division was kind of an afterthought. It was all things cardiovascular in Medtronic at that time.
Mhm.
And so we had the freedom as reps, as territory reps, to cover multiple therapies. And what happened in my territory at the time when I was in the middle of doing neuromodulation, a neurosurgeon arrived at one of my hospitals who was Stanford trained, deep brain stimulation. And so the responsibility fell to me on developing that relationship, developing that program with her, and understanding the entire patient pathway doing deep brain stimulation surgery. And she was the one who helped me take it up even another level of what, like, my gosh, the brain is the most fascinating thing ever. So I was doing certainly neuromodulation. I was doing deep brain stimulation cases at the same time, and because I was working in academic institutions, we were using deep brain stimulation for all kinds of um, possible therapies. Right? It wasn't just for Parkinson's or essential tremor. It was helping with seizures, and
Mhm.
I got to be part of this incredibly rarefied world at that time. Deep brain stimulation wasn't terribly common, and I got to be in this privileged world of learning from people who were on the cutting edge and driven by their own interest and passion. So from that world, I went on and later moved into both brain and spine. And with regard to spine, it was doing complex surgeries, particularly deformity. So some degen. A lot of the complex surgeries I was in was complex spine, but it continued to evolve when it came to brain surgery. I ended up being in any and every kind of case you can think of. So for people out there who don't know that world very well, Medtronic produces an imaging and computer system. It's a lot like GPS for brain surgery. And my responsibility was running those systems for the surgeons. And if the surgeon could come up with a way to use the instrumentation and the software to do the kind of surgery that he or she wanted, and we had never investigated that before, it was my job to go right along with them and figure out how we use the system for them to do what they wanted. So they were really pioneers in helping Medtronic understand the future and the trajectory of how these systems were going to be used. And now they're almost all everywhere standard of care, right? There are very few surgeons
Mhm.
now who will not use the imaging in the computer system to do, especially complex brain surgeries. So that's really the trajectory of how I started out in the pharmaceutical world, and then I end up in the rarefied world. I think at one point in my career in that role, I was about one of 500 in the world doing what I did. And talk about a privileged place. And
Mhm.
being in places like Mayo Clinic and Stanford, learning from the best of the best was like some of the most exciting work I've ever done.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Whirlwind experience. And
Yes.
then you allude to a moment on your website that a day came that was like your worst day
Yeah.
ever in the OR. And I would love to hear about it, because given the nature of the work that you're doing, that could be really, really bad. Um, Tell us what life was like for you, maybe leading up to that point, what it looked like from a workload standpoint, and then tell us about that day that was kind of the catalyst for a pivot and a change.
I love that about you because you ask me questions that other people don't think about asking me because you come from that world, right? You know what it is to place those people and you know what the role is.
Mhm.
So at that point, I was living in Florida. I had come out of the Minneapolis St. Paul market, one of the busiest for navigation surgery, is one of the busiest in the country. And I had been with Medtronic about 16 years at that, or no, not even, it's about 15 years at that point. And I was looking to slow down a little bit. I was in a
Mhm.
team of six, but we were essentially on call 24/7 given how the explosion of growth in the territory was going. And I was starting to really get to the point of I don't know if I can keep doing this pace anymore. And an opportunity came up to transfer to Florida in the Fort Myers area. And what was proposed to me at the time was you won't have any call, and this is the caseload. Because I came from an environment where we were averaging about 35, 40 cases a week. And I was looking to do yeah, significantly less than that.
Mhm.
And it was in that particular market. So I accepted the transfer. I went down there, and a couple months went by, and what I was told turned out to be correct, but we were in the middle of COVID, and people
Mm.
were moving to the state like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, people needed way more spine surgeries, they needed way more ENT surgeries, and they needed way more
Mhm.
brain surgeries. And all of a sudden, I was on call all the time, and it was just me. I didn't have 5 other teammates anymore. So I thought I was going down to just start to kind of wind down my career a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And you ramped it up, way up, not intentionally.
I ramped it way up. And the breaking point came, as I mentioned on my website, when I had a 17-hour day in the operating room, that where every single thing that could go wrong that day did. Equipment failures, patients nearly coding on the table. I had to be in 2 rooms at once. Surgeons were not happy about that. I had to negotiate a fight between surgeons about why I got to be in one room and not the other. And for your audience, for those of you who work a lot with instrumentation, the problems with the instrumentation, things getting dropped, the SPD not turning things around fast enough. It was one of those days where like you could not catch a break. I couldn't remember
Mhm.
the last time I went to the bathroom, and I was there. In this case, we ended up doing a total of 5 cases that day. I started
Mhm.
out thinking I was going to be done by about 2. We only had 3 cases. One was a quick case, but
Yeah.
things kept getting added and added, right? And then at the end of the
Mhm.
day, a very complex spine case got added. And for anybody who works in spine, you know that these complex spine cases minimum 7 hours, right? So between
Mm.
trying to get instruments turned, not enough instruments, stuff going wrong with patients, staff changes. We all know that, the shift changes at the end of the day. And if you're doing a complex spine case at the end of the day, and you've got a team who they're not neuro anymore, they're whoever the OR can pull
Mhm.
in to help you. So it was that kind of day. And I got to the hospital at 6 a.m. I didn't leave until midnight. I had another hour drive home after that. My longest day in the operating room had been 14 hours at that point. And the 17-hour day, now that I have time to look back, the other thing that made it really one of the worst days of my career was because I was in a place of perfectionism. I was in a place of I
Mhm.
cannot ask for help because it'll make me look bad. It's right. I'm with these new surgeons. I'm with new
Mhm.
teammates. If I start calling and ask for help, it's going to make me look like I don't know what I'm doing and I have all these years of experience. Like these were the
Mhm.
stories going on in my head, right?
Right.
And I think the thing that I really want to impress to your audience today is I know what that world is because most of us don't ask for help because we're really afraid that either our competition is going to, take advantage of what we
Mhm.
don't know, or our
Yeah.
teammates are going to chastise us, and instead of supporting us, they're going to tear us down. Because I did witness that
Yeah.
um, in my career, watching people kind of tear each other down. Like, what is wrong with you? Why don't you know that?
Mhm.
And so that day itself ended up between all the things going wrong, at one point, one of the surgeons crashed the imaging piece of equipment into the table
Mm.
with the patient. It damaged the system. It was just that kind of day,
Yeah.
and
Mm.
it was also the thing that kept me going through that day was I promised myself as a treat, as a reward, that when I get done at this hospital, I'm gonna go to the my favorite wine store. I'm gonna go buy my
Mhm.
favorite bottle of expensive wine because I don't have to be in the operating room tomorrow, and I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna have a couple glasses of wine and unwind. That's what kept me going through the day,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm. Yep.
Well, I never got that glass of wine. And what I didn't understand then that I understand now is I can get through the worst days of my entire career and not need anything to drink, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
the thing that woke me up that day was this life is not sustainable. And I am using while I didn't have an alcohol problem that would land me in rehab or in a
Hmm.
12-step program, I used between, depending on what caseload was like, every single day for 365 days a year for 5 years. I used 1 to 3 glasses every day as my release valve to turn my mind down because I had no tools to use to
Hmm.
turn my mind down and turn it off. And then, of course, the pace that I was living too.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's the thing that I really want to hit home to your audience is that I was running at a pace that I could not sustain, and I was trying to find things that did not help me. At the time, it
Hmm.
felt like
Yeah.
it helped me to deal with it, but it didn't, right? But it
Hmm.
also was the best day of my life because here I am nearly 4 years later, and I left that world, but I still get to be part of medicine. We can talk about that later, but I'm
Hmm.
coaching people to do what I did now.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's a fantastic overview. I love having you on because obviously I do a lot of work in medical device and with extraordinary people like yourself. And I also like to talk about transitions and career transitions for people that go out of medical, and because I think there's sometimes a fear that there is no life after medical. Well, what would
Mhm.
I do professionally? What is there for me? And having the opportunity to have you on and feature you and show people, hey, there's a whole nother world out there. You have all the bona fides that you could possibly have in this world, of really high level case support and intense environments. And we might talk about how intense those environments can be. You just
Mhm.
did. We might talk about that a little further, but I really love, to bring you on. And for someone in the audience that's sitting here and listening to this, I wonder, they might be thinking, alcohol is a necessary tool of the job for me. There's society meetings and there's, after hours mixers, and it's how work gets done, in sales. Can you speak to that? Because I know you're in cases all the time, but
Yeah.
also I'm assuming there were plenty of customer meetings and things like that where they would bring you in and.
There really were. No, you absolutely nailed it, Jordan, because that was the story I told myself too, is, when we go to these customer dinners, because you're dealing with very sophisticated, educated people. A lot of them come
Mhm.
with, wine knowledge, et cetera. And you believe it's an opportunity to bond. It's one more opportunity to bond
Mhm.
with your customer if you can hold your own and have these conversations about, this wine from this region and that year was this, and that certainly, I had a very strong background in that, and that was something that did physicians and surgeons really respected that about me because they don't always want to talk about business, right? They want to talk
Right.
about some other interesting
Hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's the story I told myself is if I don't participate in having this particular type of beverage in my glass, then I cannot bond and have an interesting conversation with the people I'm talking to or mix and network at society meetings with the people I need to mix and network. That's the story I told
Hmm.
myself. And to your audience, I want to, especially where we are right now in these times, there is a growing acceptance of people understanding that alcohol, guess what? It is a neurotoxin. It is a class one carcinogen. And if you're trying to live a biohacking life of cold plunges and
Hmm.
saunas and eating organic foods, alcohol doesn't have a place there, right? So we're in a time right now, if you want to go to some of these customer dinners, et cetera, instead of saying, I don't drink, you say, you know what, I kicked that out of my diet. And let me tell you why, because I feel amazing, right? That's a
Hmm.
completely different kind of conversation. And that's what
Hmm.
I do for my clients is I train them that we never talk about alcohol as a problem. We always talk about it as that's something I wanted out of my diet because everybody
Hmm.
respects that, right?
Yep. The minute you
Mhm.
said it, it's a game changer. I just, because people are saying that. You see it on LinkedIn. And a lot of times it's connected to health and fitness and body
Yep.
transformation of people too. You're
Yep.
seeing a lot of that, um, people's testimonials and speaking to that. You use a methodology you call Revive, I think, right? Can you kind of break that down for us? Is that an acronym
Mhm.
or is that,
Yeah,
how'd you
it
come
is an
up with it?
acronym. And it's, rather than go through all the acronym here, I'll
Mhm.
essentially just walk your audience through It's based on neuroscience, mindset principles, and a faith practice of any sort for what anyone's trying to do. It's called Revive. And the reason I called it Revive was because I was in this place because I developed this entire system for me, right? We can go into that later on about why I needed to develop it. But
Hmm.
it was something that as soon as I started applying neuroscience knowledge with mindset principles, the faith practice hadn't shown up yet. I started to understand that the stories I told myself and the shame and the blame and the judgment I had around why was I stuck in this loop of using alcohol to turn my mind down. When I started getting all the pieces of information together, it made so much sense. And instead of staying in this place of, what the heck is wrong with me? I moved into, of course that's happening because look at what happens when you consume alcohol. And there was all kinds of new health data that was coming out at the time, Jordan, which
Hmm.
completely contradicts years and decades of, oh, this is really quite healthy for you. Consume it in moderation. And it
Hmm.
turns out there's zero safe amounts of alcohol to drink, especially if you're over 50. And that's a whole other conversation too. But the Revive, really, I named it that because I was in this place of absolute stagnation. I was just surviving and I was not thriving. I was existing. And so I felt like it was literally, when I put those three things together in my life, I felt like I literally revived my life. So that's why I
Hmm.
named it that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, let's talk about someone, I'm just thinking of the average audience member driving, I don't know, to Amarillo right now, and they're listening to this
Right.
podcast and they're saying, how do I know if I have an issue with alcohol? How do I know if this is something that, I need to do a self diagnostic on and examine, because I don't think I do. But then if I look over the last week or so or 2 weeks, this is maybe something I need to think about. How would someone go through that kind of self checklist and see if they need to have uh, another alternative approach that someone
That
like you could help them with?
that is such a great question, and it's something that, if I meet party people at parties or something and they ask what I do and I share it with them, that's one of the first things they ask me is, "Well, I don't think I have a problem, but let me tell you what's going on, and is it a problem?"
Hmm.
And I love it so much. Or the other complete opposite is they will tell me they don't have a problem, and then they proceed to tell me how much they drink, and I'm thinking to myself, "That might be a problem."
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Yeah. Well, I love how they open up to you and feel comfortable talking to you about it. So
They
clearly you've
really
got a.
do. They really do. It took me by such a surprise. But
Mhm.
to answer your question, I would say if you are spending a lot of your time um, thinking about your drinking, that's a good indication that it's more of a problem than you think it is. And what I would invite you to do is change the language around it. So instead of saying, "Do I have a problem?" because that comes with all kinds of baggage about, "Oh my gosh, am I an alcoholic? Do I need to go to rehab? Is this a shameful thing?" If you say to yourself, as I'm drinking these things or I'm consuming whatever amount I'm consuming, does that help me meet my goals in my life that I have for myself, whether it's my health, my career,
Mhm.
is it doing anything to move me forward? And if the answer is no, I would invite you to say to yourself, should this continue to have a place in my life if it's not doing anything to serve me, right? Because a
Mhm.
lot of times we fool ourselves with the old health data that it's not doing any harm. And it turns out if you have 1 to 3 glasses of wine every day for 5 years, it it does harm, right?
Hmm.
And if you that and I
What
give
kind of
that
harm does it
that
do?
was my
Because
number.
yeah, let's stop there for a second. A reminder for those who don't know, we're not just a podcast. We are a medical device recruiting firm and we fill positions nationally. There's not one state I know of where we have not made placements. Visit chasemedsearch.com to find our latest position listings. You can also find me, Jordan Chase, on LinkedIn, and I post up to date position listings there. I'm capped at 30,000 LinkedIn connections, so you can follow me on LinkedIn, but unfortunately, I can't accept your invitation if you send me one. Finally, if you've got feedback on our podcast, please email it to me at jordan@chasemedsearch.com. I love suggestions for topics for the show. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe on YouTube. It does help grow the show. And now back to our podcast. I want to camp out that for a second because we heard for years and years and years you should have at least one glass of red wine. It's got a benefit for your heart and there's some antioxidants in it or something like that. But you're saying science has kind of gone. I'm not a teetotaler, by the way. For anybody out there listening, I do drink on occasion. I always notice the next day that I don't have my energy is down. I always notice I'm an energy vampire at this point. After 50, I'm always looking for whatever's going to provide me more energy. I tend to find alcohol provides less the next day, so I don't do it as much. But I'm just curious, what is the latest science? What's being found out about alcohol?
Maybe your audience will remember, so back around January, the first week of January, the Surgeon General in our country came out and said there is no benefit to alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons the Surgeon General came out with that is because I think it's about 5 or 6 years ago now that the National Health Service in the UK published a study. It was a massive, massive study. And for those people in your audience who are study nerds like I am, because I came up in the world of pharma, you had to understand what a good study was and defend it, et cetera. And when I looked at the numbers and the way this study was done in the National Health Service, it is stellar because it was millions of people. The whole reason the UK government looked at the numbers was because they were trying to find areas where they could start reducing costs to their national health program, right? And so they specifically looked at alcohol, and what they discovered is max, what they call a unit, would be probably about an ounce in our measurements. 7 units max a week would be a recommended safe amount for anybody. But more specifically, the study started to counsel physicians in the who are providing their services as part of the overall national health service, that they were recommending do not recommend any alcohol to your patients. And in fact, these are the things we want you to do to start helping your patients leave alcohol behind. So that study blew all the old stuff out of the water. And if you start to look into who funded the earlier studies of red wine's good for you because it contains resveratrol, it has these antioxidants in it, they completely were skewed to focus on the tiny cardiovascular benefit, but they didn't talk about because your liver literally turns the alcohol into acetyl alcohol, which is the most toxic, the most toxic thing you can have for your brain. So they ignored the acetyl alcohol effects that were going on, and they looked purely about, well, it has these compounds, and we know these compounds are good for the heart. So that's how the data ended up getting skewed, right? But this new study from the National Health Service just blew everything out of the water. And that's why you see this growing awareness of people who are like, you know what, I want that out of my diet. Because they're like you, Jordan. They notice, especially as you start getting older, that your body's efficiency at clearing the alcohol out starts to diminish, like a lot of things, right? And that's why it becomes harder and harder to get a good night's sleep, to clear the alcohol out of your system. And you just get less efficient at it. And so my thing is, I don't ever want to shame anybody around their habits. Maybe you drink a couple drinks a month, maybe you have 5 drinks a night. I don't know. But what I want you to understand is this never has to be this. I know the 12-step programs have served millions for decades, right? But I think what happens is in our country in particular, we've built up this kind of wall of shame around somebody got addicted to an addictive drug. Like, why are you ashamed of that? You shouldn't be, because you were told it wasn't an addictive drug, and it turns out it is, right? So my goal is to help people understand that anytime you want alcohol out of your life, you have 100% permission to do it, if you haven't had any problems, your marriage is not falling apart, you haven't had DUIs, you're doing great in your job. I don't want you to run into awful, awful problems before you kick it out of your diet. I want you to know you can do it now. And that's the whole point of the clients that I serve. I don't ever want them to get to that point.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. It sparks all kinds of thoughts. One is that had to be an absolute bomb for British pub culture when that came out because it's in the UK. And we
Mhm.
went to the UK, my family and I, this past summer. And I mean, it was just pub culture is everywhere in Great Britain. So
Mhm.
I can imagine how that was received when it came out. Um, you know, piggybacking off of an earlier comment you made about I kicked that out of my diet, I think about a conversation I had with my son last week about why he often abstains, even though he's in college, because he works
Mm.
out so hard and it's bad for his muscle. He said it just alcohol and muscle growth don't go together. Can you
Yep.
speak to some of those other things that people might not think about when it comes to
Mhm.
not just your brain, obviously that's your expertise, but other
Right.
effects on the body?
Yeah. So there's two things I can answer for you here. One is if your audience wants an absolutely fantastic read on every single thing that happens to your body from your nervous system to your cardiovascular to your muscular,
Hmm.
there is an author whose name is William Porter, and he has written a book called Alcohol Lied to Me. And he's written 2 books on it actually, and he walks you through every single thing. He's a British author.
Hmm.
And one of the things I love that you brought it up, and I love that your son understands this. Like, he has not bought into alcohol as this health drink. He understands that, no, if I
Right.
wanna hit these goals in the gym, that has no place
Hmm.
in my love that so much. And one of the things that I like to share with my clients, because they tend to be women who are like mid 40s to about up to 60, is we're already losing muscle mass at this point,
Hmm.
right? And so if you are drinking on top of that, you're losing the muscle mass. So the other thing that I want your audience to know is there's emerging data, especially when it comes to your brain, that when you're, especially when you're consuming alcohol on a regular basis. Dr. Daniel Amen is someone who really got my attention about 4 years ago around that. The Your risk for any kind of dementia, Alzheimer's, Lewy body, any kind of dementia dramatically increases. And it's primarily because it dramatically decreases blood flow, it dramatically decreases your sleep. If you're 50, to any of the 50-year-old ladies out there listening to this, you're already having trouble sleeping because your hormonal changes are going wild, right? And if you add
Hmm.
even a glass of wine, that will disrupt your sleep. So between the decrease in the blood flow, the decrease in your sleep quality, that puts you at a dramatic increase for some kind of later dementia. So, I mean, we could go on and on. I don't want to put your audience in in a downer. I want
No,
to talk to
it's a
them
great,
about what we can
you know,
do.
these
Yeah.
are things. No, I remember an article I saw that came out not too long ago. Maybe it was after the Surgeon General made their statement. Was Americans are so unaware of the link between alcohol and cancer
Yeah.
and the established strong linkage between the use of alcohol and developing
Mhm.
all types of cancers. Are you familiar with that as well? Because I read it as an American. I'm thinking, well, that's never brought up. I don't remember hearing that very often.
Mhm. I am, and it's I don't to my mind, there's 2 things. I have 0 proof that these are linked, but it makes me very, very curious. So about 20 years ago, women the big alcohol companies started really, really marketing to women, right? We started
Hmm.
getting all, these drinks that were fruity and they were sweeter and, they're a little bit lower alcohol, right around 5%. But,
Hmm.
and then some of the wines, like the wines got sweeter. And at that time where the marketing ramped up to I also noticed that the incidence of women and breast cancer was continuing to rise as well. So I don't think those 2 things are unrelated. And
Hmm.
when you especially when you're consuming sweeter kinds of alcoholic beverages, the for anybody who doesn't know, most cancers are fueled by glucose. So if you're if you're consuming the alcohol, which already increases your risk for any kind of cancer, and you're consuming increased amounts of glucose, those 2 things are a very dangerous combination for your risk of developing any kind of cancer. So that's my own 2 cents worth about why we're seeing an increase in breast cancers in women. Some people would tell you we
Mhm.
just have better diagnostics. That might be true, but I can tell you that there's zero doubt in medicine now that alcohol contributes to cancer.
Hmm. I don't want to be the no fun crew here. I'm not saying you're being that way. I'm prompting and provoking these questions, but talk to me
Great.
about life after going through this process. For you, for your clients, maybe we can talk about, no names, of course, but someone you've taken from the first step when they picked up the phone or sent you an email or reached out and said, I think I need to go through this process. Tell me, maybe let's talk about a test case. That might be good.
Yeah, okay, sure, we
Yeah.
can do that. So there's a number of people. There's somebody who just signed up with me right now. She's gonna be amazing. I wanted before I talk to you about her, I do wanna talk about because this is the beauty of entrepreneurship, that anybody who's in medical device now considering moving in entrepreneurship at some point, I wanna share this story with you because you just don't know
Hmm.
where entrepreneurship's gonna take you. So I met this young lady. She's not my typical client avatar, right? She is a physician and we were acquaintances. We weren't really friends. And she heard my story about walking away from alcohol and I don't miss it and I've done all these things in my life. And she was inspired by me to stop drinking. And she came to me 6 months after that and she said, I don't need your help with the alcohol. I might need some help with there, but I'm in the
Hmm.
middle of this career change. And you've done something that I want to do. So she wanted to leave corporate medicine, what I call corporate medicine, and go
Hmm.
out and start her own faith-based medical practice, private practice. And one of the things that I used to do, both for Wyeth Pharmaceuticals and with Medtronic, was to any surgeons or physicians coming out of residency, it was part of my job to help them go out and build their practice if they were joining a
Hmm.
group, to build their practice as quickly as possible. So I had to coach them on how to hold patient events. I had to coach them on how to speak to patients, not as a doctor, but as here's the service I provide. And so I
Hmm.
had this skill set, and she came to me and I said, "Oh my gosh, I can absolutely help you build this practice. And let's talk about the neuroscience behind because Jordan, many physicians do not think that they can ever be entrepreneurs, right?
Right. Hmm.
We know a few, like in the pain management world, they seem to get it. Like that attracts both the physician
Hmm.
and the entrepreneur mindset, right? But she's a podiatrist. And she was like, I don't know how to do this. And I said, you can
Hmm.
100% do it. Let's work on your mindset. Let me teach you how your brain works so you can retrain it to start thinking like an entrepreneur. And then let's put your faith practice together. And we also walked through some, going through the data around alcohol that you and I just talked about.
Hmm.
So we've been working together 9 months now. She is crushing it in her private practice. She just started coaching another physician to do what she's doing. So it's like the
Yeah.
see one, do one, teach one, right? And I'm so proud of her, and it's a cash paying
Hmm.
practice. She
Yeah.
focuses on
Even
on
better.
families, right? Like, we have to dial in on
Hmm.
who are the patients you really wanna serve. So that's one client, and I'll share with you another client who is more my traditional, type of client. She is late 50s. She's in the middle of she worked in the world of education, not as a teacher,
Hmm.
but like helping to develop curriculums for the state. And she's an incredibly bright lady. She bought into all the things that you and I talk about. When I'm at these different meetings, everybody's having a glass of wine. I have to have the wine too. She's not somebody who was drinking a lot, but it was
Hmm.
causing her some significant health issues that she wasn't quite putting the things together. So she and I walked through my Revive program, and with people like that I'm helping them transition away from alcohol. We start with
Hmm.
the neuroscience piece and we start with the alcohol health piece, right? So I walked her through the first part of my curriculum. I walked her through the studies themselves so she could see, because she's such a smart lady, so she could see for herself what the data had to say. and why it's not good for her either, right? And we
Hmm.
walked through Dr. Daniel Amen's SPECT scans, SPECT, because it shows blood flow to the brain. And those scans are the greatest gift ever for to help people figure out what their brain looks like if they've been consuming alcohol chronically for a long time. That's what scared me. So
Hmm.
I walked her through that. And then we really started focusing on, because she knows nothing about neuroscience. I started teaching her about the way the brain works and why it works the way it does, and it's designed to protect you. And while it's protecting you, sometimes it's getting in your way. So here's how we do that. And I talked to her about developing new neural pathways and the consistency required there. And then we talked about mindset, and she is a woman who's Catholic. So we incorporated her
Hmm.
daily Catholic faith practice into that. And the last thing I want to say about that for that client, why the faith practice is so important, is we now know, thanks to the work of Dr. Andrew Newberg, who is a pioneer in the study of neurotheology, that the reward circuit in your brain, when you are at meditation, so if you're meditating, you're in prayer, it doesn't matter if you're, because he studied Buddhist monks, he studied nuns, he studied Mormons. When you are in that process of meditation and prayer, your reward circuit in your brain lights up like it would if you were drinking a glass of wine, if you were smoking a cigarette, if you were playing, right? So our brains, to me, that means our brains are literally designed to seek God. So when you're
Hmm.
removing something that was previously rewarding, that lighting up that reward circuit, with something
Hmm.
else that lights up that reward circuit, it's a much easier transition to get something out of your life that you don't want and that doesn't serve you.
Yeah. I want to talk about that for a second because you on your website, you're very open that you're a practicing Catholic, and
Mhm.
yet your methodology and your service is really open to people of all faiths, people of no faith at all, agnostics. How does that work with someone that, might be sitting here and saying, well, I'm not really a churchgoer
Yeah.
or I, you know, don't really do that. How can you help them also in this process?
Yeah, I talk with them because I understand, this is the beauty of having the kind of career that I've had. I had to be able to have conversations with people who were the janitors at the hospital all the
Mhm.
way up to the CFO of the hospital, right? And I learned a valuable lesson of you meet people where they are. So if someone comes to me and says, Catherine, I don't want that religious mumbo jumbo, but I like the idea of
Mhm.
learning about the brain, I say, tell me what language you like to use. What do you prefer to talk about? And if you're an atheist, I don't know that what I have to offer you is the right fit for you. But if you
Mhm.
are agnostic and you believe that there's something bigger than you, maybe you like to call it the
Mhm.
universe, maybe you like to call it life or creator or source, I am happy to use your language and help you feel comfortable with building some kind of practice that will serve you, right? So maybe it's a
Mhm.
meditation practice, listening to different types of meditations versus doing, for my Catholic clients, we pray the rosary and there's certain prayers I have
Mhm.
them pray at certain times, right?
Mhm.
So if you feel comfortable with, I'm going to listen to this meditation during these times when the times I might normally be drinking something, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do meditation instead, right?
Mhm.
I might drink this kind of tea, or I will completely customize it to you, because my mission, this is not a job to me, this is a vocation, this is a business and
Mhm.
a ministry to me. So I am
Mhm.
called to help anybody and everybody who reaches out to me regardless of where they are.
Mhm. That's fantastic. You've chosen to focus on women as clients pretty
Mhm.
exclusively, right? Why was that? Why did you decide? I mean, you're obviously a woman, but what was that decision matrix there? Because men obviously are. There are some men that have these issues as well.
Yes. I want to be clear to your audience. If there are some men out there who are like, I kind of like the what Catherine's approach, but she only works with women. That
Hmm.
I do have some men who we're not working together yet, but we're in conversations. And the reason I chose women initially is I was told after that awful day one, there were two more days that started me on my streak of where I am now. And on that day three, I was told that now's the time to do this, right? Now's the time to
Hmm.
leave medicine. And I was also told that what I'm going to pull you out of, I need you to do for others. And I had this argument with God for about a year. I said, "No, I'm staying in medicine." And
Hmm.
and we see how that worked out, right? So I decided that I knew I had just been through my own thing, so I knew I could teach other women to do it. I didn't know what it was like to be a man and have a gray zone drinking
Hmm.
habit. So that's where I started. And what I'm learning is the clients who really need you find you. So just like my
Hmm.
physician friend who didn't need me for the help with the alcohol, but she needed my help to build the business. I'm just being open to where Holy Spirit takes me as far as
Hmm.
who I'm supposed to serve. And my business literally is changing real time right now. I still have my coaching business, but now this speaking career is launching for me that I never expected.
Hmm.
So I
I
want
asked,
go
yeah,
ahead, George.
yeah, no, that's great. I asked because, about a half dozen times a year I get calls late in into the evening
Yeah.
from friends of mine that I've known for years. And clearly they're well beyond one or two beers when they
Okay.
call, and they're in a, typically it's a bad situation at work, and they're under a tremendous amount of stress and
Mhm.
pressure, and they're always guys. So I just was curious, from my own standpoint, or if someone is in the audience listening and saying, I would like to recommend her to someone, a friend of mine, and I think this talk is clearly, you're getting, they're getting some exposure to you and how you are, how you communicate, your approach. And I think that might lower a lot of barriers that people might otherwise have. So I was just
Yeah.
curious if you would be ever open to a referral, if it was a guy.
Absolutely. And may I bring up one more point here, and this is
Mhm.
why. So for the majority of my career in medical device, a lot of times I was the only woman in the room, with the
Mhm.
exception maybe of like the circulating nurse. I have spent 17 years working primarily with men, right? Male reps,
Mhm.
male surgeons. I'm incredibly comfortable speaking to men, spending time with men. And so if you are a gentleman listening to this and you know somebody or it's you and you're curious about
Mhm.
this, 100% I want you to reach out to me. There are no barriers.
Mhm.
And I think actually that's you, Jordan, you and I having this conversation. There's probably a reason why we're
Mhm.
talking about this right now because somebody does need to hear it. So I want them to understand, yes, reach out to me.
That's great. Well, you have been absolutely incredible with your time and just incredible in general, to have on. How can people get a hold of you? How can they find you? What's your website? How can people reach out?
Yeah, so they can. I'm on all the socials. In
Mhm.
January, I made a commitment about being far more visible because I was doing everything referral based before, and I got a call from the Holy Spirit. He's like, "No, you need to go way bigger." So you can find me on all the socials:
Mhm.
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. What else am I forgetting? LinkedIn. Kathryn
Mhm.
Traff Coaching. Very, very simple. I have a YouTube channel now. All the videos that go out on the socials go up on the YouTube channel, so you can watch those. And my
Mhm.
website, which is shortly to be under development, but right now it's revivesoberspirit.com. But the easiest way to get hold of me, reach out to me on the socials.
That's great. That's
Yep.
great. Well, I think you'll be hearing from folks. It's an incredibly necessary service, in my opinion, and you're doing amazing things with it. So thank you for being on today and sharing
You.
it with our audience.
And I still get to be involved in medicine. Yay!
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Thanks again, Catherine.